Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Gillette Pozos, and here with me we have Miss Alex Long, head coach and dietitian at VGFN. And if you listened to last week's episode where we talked all about hormonal birth control, everything you need to know about it, the pros, the cons, why you might take it, why some side effects that might come along with it, and really how it works in the body. We wanted to do another episode where we actually talked about our own experiences with birth control, why we chose to come off, what our experiences with coming off were like, and what you need to know if you are interested in coming off of hormonal birth control.
Yes, I am so freaking passionate about this topic, and I'm really excited to share my story because this is actually the first time that I'm talking about this publicly.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, so you and I, we both have had very different experiences with birth control. And we talked about this a little bit before we hit record, and we were kind of comparing and contrasting our notes with it. So I think we're going to be able to give a lot of takeaways to the listeners, no matter kind of where they're at, what their relationship with birth control is, what their experience is, because we both come from very different angles on it, to say.
Yeah, for sure. We have very different stories.
Yeah. So you were more of a pill girl. I was more of an IUD girl. I actually started with the pill. So I can kind of dive into my story a little bit with birth control. I think I'm different from most because I actually didn't start hormonal birth control until I was 21 years old.
Yeah, that's crazy. I was so young when I started. I was only 14.
Yeah. But, for me, it was truly just, I had a great cycle all through my teen years. I was one of the lucky few who I had no issues. I never had painful periods. I never had really bad bleeds. I never had acne. I had, of course, a little bit of hormonal acne here and there, but it was nothing ever unmanageable where I was like, I need to take hormonal birth control to, regulate my acne like they try and tell you to do. For me, it was truly just, I got to a point in my life where I was like, I want to use this for what its intended use is originally as true birth control, as a really, preventing having a baby before I was ready.
Yeah, totally fair.
And so at 21 years old, I ended up being put on the pill. And after, not very long with the pill, it was, maybe a month or so, I was immediately noticing some side effects coming on from the pill right off the bat. And so that's where I want to kind of emphasize of for myself, since I had so much of my life, my young adulthood, I had not been on the pill and I'd had a really healthy cycle without any complaints. I could immediately tell the difference in my body being on the pill. I could very, very much feel the differences in how I felt just being on it. And so for myself, it was immediately just not quite feeling great, kind of feeling a little bit sick, but I also knew okay, probably going to take my body a little bit of time to adjust. But after a while, I started having these horrible, just massive breakouts on my face. And I had never had really bad acne before, but this was really bad acne. It was you could not cover it up. And it was just massive, painful mounds on my face. And so I was immediately thinking okay, I need to go to a dermatologist and get this taken care of.
Yeah.
And I went to the dermatologist and they gave me some different medications and different, stuff to put on it. And I did that for a while. It was not getting any better. And I was probably 4 to 6 months in to being on the pill. I had gone back to the dermatologist, this is not working. What do I do? Please, God, help me. This is terrible. And she was actually the one that I think initially kind of suggested well, it could be hormonal too. And that's when I was well, I did just get on the pill not that long ago. And she was actually the one I think that kind of she didn't say it directly, but she had suggested of oh yeah, it could be related to that. And so I actually then went back to my gynecologist and I told her, I was is there anything else I could take? I think that the pill is giving me really bad acne. And she actually kind of almost snubbed me a little bit of no, that's not right. It can't, it's probably something else. So you probably just have acne. Just wasn't really listening to me. I'm no, I've never had acne before. This just started when I got on the pill. But long story short, she did decide to change me to a different pill. And so I switched to a different pill. And at that point, it still didn't get any better. Long story short, I went back to her again and I was this is not working for me. Is there anything else I can do? And that's when she suggested the IUD. I had at this point also talked to some of my friends at work at the time. I had a couple of girlfriends who also had IUDs, and they were like raving about how fantastic it is because you don't have a period anymore and like it's just so convenient. And I was like, well, yeah, sign me up. Like that sounds amazing. I don't want to bleed every month. And so I then ended up getting the IUD. I'm pretty sure I was given Mirena. And so initially when I first got it in, I remember it like being uncomfortable, but not that bad. I just, by contrast of just having been on the pill, I felt way better. And then I pretty much immediately lost my period. And so I was like, for me, I was like, woohoo, no more bleed. This is great. Like, come on. Like, who doesn't want to, lose their period? It sounds awesome when you're in your young 20s.
Young and naive.
Exactly. Because, if you listen back to last episode where we talk about the reason that having a monthly bleed is so important for your body, I was not aware of that. Nobody ever taught me that. I had zero knowledge around this. And so for me, it was just like, yeah, it sounds great. Like, not to have to, use tampons. Like, come on. Let's be honest. This is great. Well, after a little while of being on the IUD, I think it was a good year or two, I remember like slowly over the course of time, just I had always had a little bit of mental health like troubles throughout life. Primarily I had dealt with some depression in college, but I never had like severe anxiety before. But I remember during this period of time, I started to develop more and more anxiety. Of course, it's like being in your young 20s. It also is like very easily normalized at the same time too. But looking back later, I kind of realized that it did start about the same time that I actually had, started this hormonal birth control journey and like really just got worse over time as it went on. So by the time I went back to get my second IUD, because eventually you do, of course, have to have that replaced. The second one, I remember having that one placed and my body just like clearly was signaling to me that I don't like this, of like, there's a foreign object inside of you and I don't like this, because as soon as she put it in, I was great, walked out of the office, was walking towards the parking deck to go to get my car and drive home. And I just suddenly was hit with the most terrible cramps I've ever experienced in my life. Like I crawled to the bathroom, like no joke. I crawled to the bathroom. Luckily it was like there was nobody else there. And I just sat on the bathroom floor thinking like, I think I need to throw up. Like, I don't know what is happening, but I just I feel like I'm dying right now. And it lasted for probably like 15 minutes. I managed to call Omar and I was just like crying to him. I was like, I can't drive home. Like I'm dying. And eventually it did settle down enough where I was like, okay, I think I'm fine. Like I still didn't feel good for like the rest of the day and probably a good week or so afterward. But that was like the first kind of sign for me that I'm like, oh, this is kind of weird that like I'm actually putting this IUD in my body and like it just seems kind of strange. And maybe my body doesn't really like this. And so that's when I think I started to dive a little bit more into learning about this stuff. And I just started to, see some things on social media. I had started working with a coach at one point, and she was a little bit more familiar with hormonal health, and she was really, really great with digestion. And so I started noticing some digestive issues popping up that, I had a little bit of digestive issues throughout my life. I had dealt with constipation here and there before, but like never had dealt with like chronic stomach aches and just like, ebbs and flows of like different types of just irritable bowels. And I got to this point where I was like, I feel like maybe there's just something going on here. And I don't remember if it was this coach that I was working with at the time or if it was something I saw elsewhere. But at one point, I had learned that there could be a link between digestive issues and hormonal birth control. And that was also something we talked about in last week's episode.
Yeah.
But in this point, I was like, maybe, I'm like starting to do like the math in my head of like, like let me put 2 and 2 together here. I've also started to increase like more anxiety. I'm starting to notice more digestive issues. And it all seems to be things that like I didn't experience ever before starting this birth control journey. And so I had asked the coach, do you think that maybe these things are related? And she's like, yeah, I mean, you could absolutely try getting off birth control. Like she was off of birth control. So she had at least, could speak to it a little bit. And so I decided, all right, what the heck? I'm doing it. Made the appointment, got my IUD out, and I was like, yes, I'm free. The IUD's getting out. Although I will say that that was a little bit of a struggle in terms of talking to the doctor, because it's not as easy of just like being at home and just stopping taking the pill. You have to tell your doctor that you want the IUD out early. And in my case, my doctor, I have actually not gone back to see that doctor probably for this reason. She was not very understanding about it and didn't really want to listen to like why I wanted it taken out. She just was very like, are you sure? Like, I don't think like that's, you know, when I was trying to explain like, well, I've had these digestive issues and anxieties and different things that have come up about the same time that I started with birth control. And she just was like, I don't think so. Like, no, like that's probably not it. Like, are you sure? Like she was really trying to make me doubt myself, but I was set on it. I think I ended up like in tears because I was like, I just want it out. Okay, please. And so finally she did take it out. And then at that point I thought like, all right, I'm free. It's out. I should be good. Like everything's going to go back to normal, how it was before I start birth control. And womp womp. It didn't come back that easy. So I spent a while just actually trying to get my cycle back because again, I had no bleed for the course of the time that I was on the IUD. And then, so I didn't have a bleed for that period of time that I had the IUD. And so then afterwards, I still didn't have a bleed for a while. It took me a little while to get my cycle back. And then when I did, it came back like just smacked me in the face.
Yeah.
I had really bad periods for a while, like very painful cramps, just like really huge mood swings, just a lot of like things that I had never dealt with before. I'd always had great cycles up until starting birth control. And so it was very, very frustrating. But, you know, I kind of spent some time almost trying to figure it out myself. You know, I had still been working with a coach for a little while and like she, you know, had offered like a little bit of suggestions here and there, but not really like giving me anything customized. We hadn't done any labs to see what was going on. And so eventually, of course, long story short, I at some point started working with you as actually my coach. And it wasn't even like tying back to thinking like, oh, we're, you know, need to fix my hormones because of the hormonal birth control. But at that point, once you had pulled labs for me, actually, because of my stress levels and different things going on, that's when you saw like, okay, yeah, your sex hormones are terrible as well. And I think you can probably speak to that a little bit more of like what you saw at this point, because you didn't even know really about my back history with birth control. And it was just at that point that you were like, oh yeah, there's something going on here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that story, Vanessa. Like you said, I didn't know a lot of that about you. So when we did start working together, I knew that you were really stressed, really fatigued. I knew that you had a lot of gut health issues going on that we were starting to get to the bottom of. And I remember that first Dutch test that I pulled for you and saw your results. I was like, oh my gosh, like we took this in your luteal phase. Like you were bleeding every month, but it was kind of a longer cycle. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I think maybe you're not ovulating because your progesterone was so low. It was literally like in postmenopausal range. And if you guys listened to the last episode, you know that progesterone is only produced in the luteal phase if ovulation occurs. And I was like a little scared to tell you because that can be hard to hear, you know, especially if you're someone that does want kids someday. To hear that you're not ovulating, it's scary.
Yeah, I remember that was like honestly one of the things that set me into action of like, I need to get my hormone health straightened out here because I do want to have kids one day and I don't want to just put this stuff off and off and off and then suddenly decide, all right, I'm ready to start trying for kids. And then now struggle to have kids and then have to turn to other methods and, you know, spend a bunch of money on IVF and like all these different things when I could have just done the right things early on to get my hormone health to a good place naturally and feel better too, of course, as well.
Yes. And I think that's another thing that a lot of women don't realize, that you can get your cycle back and your ovulation back naturally. It took a while, but I remember our last Dutch test that we did, your sex hormones looked great. Like progesterone was up, like you're ovulating every month and you feel so much better. I don't even think your PMS symptoms are near as bad as they used to be.
I don't cramp at all anymore. Like honestly, now I'm like back to kind of feeling like, man, I'm very blessed with having a great cycle again. I do think it's probably still not what it was ever prior to starting birth control. And I don't know if it ever really will go fully back to that. And that's where it's like, I think I had kind of told you earlier, I'm like, I try never to say that I have regrets in life. And I don't know that I necessarily have regrets because I think everything happens for a reason. Everything works out the way it's supposed to. But I do regret ever starting birth control. And I just wish that I had had somebody to teach me about other, you know, fertility awareness methods to actually learn that there are alternate ways to prevent pregnancy as well. And, you know, now I use just a temperature tracking method and it's super simple, super easy. I've been doing that for a few years now, and all is well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I 100% agree. I don't really have a lot of regrets in life either, but I wish somebody told me about the possible side effects of birth control and what it really does to your body before I ever started the pill, because my story is very different. I was in a very different situation. I actually didn't get my period until I was about 14, which was a little bit late compared to some of my friends in like that like late middle school, early high school kind of time period. And oh my gosh, my first period knocked me on my ass. It was miserable. My first couple of periods, they were like 10 plus days of heavy bleeding, like bleeding through tampons in a matter of an hour. I was on the bathroom floor in school, crying, doubled over in pain, feeling nauseous, like would have to stay home from school sometimes because I was in so much pain, and like ibuprofen, nothing would touch it. It was awful. And around that time, I'd also started developing really severe cystic acne, and I didn't know what to do. Like, that's such a vulnerable time in your life. You're already feeling like, low self-esteem, body conscious as your body starts to change in puberty. Like, now with acne and debilitating periods, I think it was only maybe 3 cycles, and my mom immediately took me to the gynecologist. And bless her heart, because I know she just didn't want to see me in pain, but she took me to the doctor and she was like, please just give her birth control. And I felt like I didn't really have a say. I was just sitting back in the doctor's office, like I had no idea what was going on in my body. Nobody was teaching me about it, you know? And of course, our parents' generation, like they were all on birth control, and my mom took it. She was fine. She obviously had me, right? So she probably didn't think anything of it. And she was just pushing, give her birth control. It'll fix her periods. And the doctor honestly didn't even ask me any questions. Like, she didn't bat an eye. Like, oh, like, yep, heavy, painful periods, acne, birth control will fix it. And it honestly did. Like, at least so I thought, fix it, quote unquote. It was a Band-Aid, but I felt great. Truly, like I felt like my body was finally, quote unquote, balanced, and my acne cleared up. I was having a regular period every month, or at least so I thought. And I stayed on birth control, the same hormonal birth control pill, from age 14 through 21. And when I was around like age 18, 19, I had also gotten diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disease of the thyroid. And if you listen to last episode, it's possible there is some research to suggest that hormonal birth control can trigger autoimmune diseases. And of course, I didn't know that at the time. But around the time of age 21, I was just finishing up like senior year of college, getting ready to graduate. I was going into like the least stressful season of my life. It was summertime before I was supposed to move to Florida, go to grad school. I had just met Nelson. For those of you that don't know, Nelson is now my husband. So I was like, oh, I just met this cute guy, like graduated college. I have no responsibilities. I was just like living my best life, working part-time at a restaurant, sleeping in, doing all the things that I never got to do in college, And I had also just started kind of feeling off. Like, everything in my life was going really well, but mentally I started having some like really, really deep, dark depression, like really dark thoughts. And I had also struggled with my mental health really since high school, and anxiety, depression, like truly hating myself. For those of you that don't know, around age like 14, 15, I had also had a really, really severe eating disorder. So it was just kind of the perfect storm. But around that time, I was like, why is everything in my life so good, but I still really don't feel like myself? I started gaining a little bit of weight, and just mentally had this like constant brain fog, constant fatigue, and really deep depression. And since I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, they put me on synthetic thyroid medication. So basically thyroid hormone replacement. And I was like, I'm sick of taking all these hormones, like my thyroid shot, like my menstrual cycle was crazy, and I have to take this birth control pill, and I'm tired of it. Like, I want to kind of get my body back. So I was like, well, I feel like I can't really stop taking the thyroid meds, so I'm going to come off of birth control. And I didn't tell my doctor. I just quit cold turkey one day. I do not recommend. Please do not do that if you're listening. And my body absolutely revolted at me. It was miserable. Like, within a matter of a couple of months, maybe 2-3 months max, I had gained over 20 pounds, and I'm only 5'3". So that was a lot of weight, a lot of body fat around my thighs, my lower abdomen. I felt like I blew up. I was super puffy and bloated all the time. And my acne came back with a vengeance. It was worse than when I was 14, like cystic acne, horrible, like painful cyst, redness all over. I was miserable. And the worst part about all of that, I never got my period back. I stayed off of the pill and tried to do all of the things. At this point, I was in therapy for my eating disorder. So I was like eating well, still sleeping well, wasn't over exercising, like was in theory doing all the things right. And I still never got my period. And so at that point, I had moved down to Florida State for grad school, went through my first semester, started gaining even more weight at that point because I was also more stressed in grad school. And it wasn't until that like Christmas break, I think I went home to my old gynecologist and I like told him, like, look at my face. I don't know where this weight is coming from. I still haven't got my period. I really don't want to be on hormonal birth control because I'm tired of taking synthetic hormones. But I was never really given another option. She never even educated me on like other choices or even like herbs that I can take to regulate my cycle, nothing. And at that point I was like, well, I'm so uncomfortable in my body. I'm so self-conscious as almost like I was almost 23 at that point. Like I needed to do something about it. So I just said, like, I guess I'm going back on birth control. And she actually gave me a stronger birth control pill than last time. Yeah, it was like the first pill that I was on was kind of a low dose of estrogen, like the lowest possible. And then the second one she prescribed for me was actually like a pretty significant jump in estrogen. And she was like, oh, you'll feel great. Like you'll have energy again. It'll clear your skin. I was like, sign me up. That's great. Sounds perfect. And it did. I mean, it worked for sure. Like within a couple months, my skin was like the clearest it has ever been. My cycles regulated. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm using very heavy air quotes. And I actually did start to lose the weight. So I was like, perfect. Everything's great. I was in grad school. I had, no time to think about anything else. And then it wasn't until I started working with you. Like I got hired at VGFN, I had passed my RD exam, and I had started really getting into like the functional medicine space. And I had read Beyond the Pill, which if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend.
Great book.
Really enlightening. And I was like, shit. Because I had finally learned all of the negative side effects of birth control. I'd finally learned about what it really was doing to my body. And I was like, why do they not teach this shit in school, And I knew that I wanted to come off of the pill, but quite honestly, at that point, I was like, I feel too good. And I was not ready for kids. I was so afraid of getting pregnant because I wasn't aware of the fertility awareness method and temperature tracking and all of that kind of stuff. And Nelson and I were planning our wedding. We got married in November of 2022. Like I had bought a dress at that point and I didn't want to risk that like traumatic experience that happened when I was 21. I was so afraid that my body was going to revolt at me again. I was going to get my acne back. I was going to gain the weight. And I'm like, I selfishly wanted to feel good in my wedding photos, feel good on my wedding day. And like, just wasn't in a place mentally where I could figure out an alternative. At this point, I knew that there were ways to regulate my cycle naturally, but I just like wasn't ready to do it. I wasn't ready to risk it.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Like given the situation you were in, given the history that you had of like the first time that you got off, like I'm sure any one of us would have done the same thing of like leading up to a wedding, all the other things going on and like you were feeling good. Of course, it's like, yeah, we want to have great mental health, but sure, like I also want to feel good in my body on my wedding day.
Yeah, honestly, like I was literally having mental breakdowns like almost every month, like because my PMS was so bad. But I just like stuck it out for the sake of having clear skin. And looking back, like I don't know. I don't necessarily regret it because I do think one takeaway that I want you guys to know listening to this podcast is if you are feeling like birth control might be affecting your mental health or your physical health, you're having some negative side effects, it's okay to wait. It's okay. This is your body. You have to make the right decision for you. You do not have to rush coming off of birth control if you are not ready yet until you want to know more. Maybe work with a professional, someone who's done it, like whatever. Gather your information and wait until you're in a place where you can really go on this hormone healing journey. And there is nothing wrong with that. I knew that
Absolutely.
Inherently, like I knew it just wasn't the right time for me. But I also kind of felt like a fraud for a little while because at this point, like we were really deep in the functional health space. I was learning so much. We were helping so many women balance their hormones and come off of birth control and get their cycle back within the first month of coming off the pill. And I was like, wow, like I really know so much more that I could help others, do what I wasn't able to do myself just a couple of years ago, which was so rewarding. But secretly, I was like, I kind of feel like a hypocrite, I'm still on this medication that I know is not good for me. But at the same time, like I had to trust my gut. and I had to wait until it was right for me. So we had our wedding. I felt great. Love the photos. And really at the beginning of 2023, I embarked on like truly like my own hormone healing journey, like very similar story to you. Again, never really have talked about it publicly. I really should get into social media, guys. Like, please message me after listening to this podcast if you want me to share more on social media. But seriously, like I needed to slow down. I was so burnt out mentally and physically, and I was still on the pill. So yeah, I just decided recently, about 2 months ago, to finally come off of it. And I actually feel a lot better. I feel like a fog has lifted. I feel like my mental health is better than it's ever been. I am not falling into these deep, dark holes of depression anymore. I can't remember the last time I had like an anxiety-induced mental breakdown or anything like that. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, guys.
Yeah. And I mean, compare that to the prior time that you came off and you said like in that first month, you were having terrible acne, you were rapidly gaining weight. I mean, it's like, we can look at you now. I mean, you said yourself, you had told me off air that like your weight has stayed completely stable throughout these last 2 months. Your skin is perfect. Like if you guys are watching the video, I mean, this girl does not wear any makeup and it's irritating because her skin is perfect. But I mean, it's clearly a very different like situation that you're in now. What do you think is the difference maker of like, what did you do this time around coming off? How did you support your body through this experience? And, you know, we can get into some of the different things that we do with our clients and just any advice to our listeners if maybe they're wanting to come off too.
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I think the biggest difference was I really focused on dialing back my stress levels. So physical stress and emotional stress. I think at one point I was seeing like 2 therapists and a life coach, like really just to support my mental health.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I was chronically stressed, if I was, you know, trying to diet or lose body fat, if I was over exercising or, you know, on top of working so much, not sleeping, if I was doing any of that, I knew that coming off of the pill was just going to be harder, right? And I was already kind of thinking that it was going to be hard for me anyway. So I was like, okay, we're going to take a break from the gym. I truly think I can count on one hand the number of times that I've strength trained in 2023. And it is literally July 14th as we're recording this. And I have no regrets. I honestly just walked and, you know, really tried to implement some parasympathetic support. So yoga, I got really into yoga, which I love. I still do it. And I really focused on my bedtime routine, my sleep. And once I finally felt like I got all of those pillars in order, then probably like 3 months, maybe 2 to 3 months before coming off of the pill, I started supplementing with magnesium before bed and actually during the day as well. And if you listen to last week's podcast, you know that the pill can cause micronutrient deficiencies. So I was really working hard on like replenishing my body. I was actually eating more than ever. I think most calorie calculators, especially for someone of my size who was not working out, I think my maintenance, quote unquote, should have been like 2,000, 2,100 calories. And I was eating upwards of like 15, or yeah, not 1,500. Oh gosh, do not eat 1,500, 2,500 and even 2,600 some days. And I felt great. So I was eating more than ever. I'd actually taken a little bit of a break from tracking for a while. I was genuinely just trying to focus on nutrient-dense whole foods, honoring my body, honoring my cravings, like making room for treats, really feeling relaxed around nutrition for the first time in a while. Started supplementing with magnesium, a B complex, vitamin C, and I think zinc as well. Those are like the big 4 nutrients that the pill depletes. So I started supplementing with that for a while before actually pulling the birth control. And then about a week before my withdrawal bleed. So if you guys have a standard birth control pack with like the placebo pills, the sugar pills in the last week, I had started a protocol that I like to call the flush protocol. And this is something that I actually have implemented with you. I've implemented with clients and it really works. And it is a specific type of program, but it is very individualized. So please do not do this by yourself. I did work with another coach at this time, even though like I knew I could take myself through it. I wanted the external accountability.
Always
right?
having a coach, no matter your knowledge level, having a coach is always important.
For sure. I don't think I'll never not have a coach at this point, even though I am one. But it's called the Flush. And really, the point of this was to upregulate my liver function, my body's detoxification capacity. So you guys know, like the birth control pill is an oral contraceptive. You are intaking synthetic hormones into your body, and your body has to work hard to metabolize those and process those. And again, they're metabolized differently than your endogenous estrogen and progesterone. So a week before I stopped the hormones completely, I was following a very specific meal plan and supplement protocol that was designed to upregulate my body's detoxification. And it was designed to kind of help that, brain ovary axis come back online, right? Because the pill for years, literally since I was 14 and I'm 27 now. So my ovulation was just shut down. The communication between my brain and ovaries, it didn't exist, you know? So that was kind of like the purpose of the meal and the supplement plan. Followed that, had my withdrawal bleed, and I actually kept up that meal plan for a month. I even implemented seed cycling. So flax seeds and pumpkin seeds in my follicular phase for those first 2 weeks, and then sunflower seeds and sesame seeds in those final 2 weeks for my, luteal phase. I didn't expect to get my cycle back right away, again, because I've been on it for so long, but I was doing all of the things possible to, again, feed myself up, give my body the nutrients that it needed, really help my body detox and flush out those synthetic hormones so that my own hormones could actually have a chance again, right? I was kind of retraining my body on how to produce estrogen and how to ovulate, how to produce FSH, LH, all these things. And I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. So far, like I've actually been feeling really good. I've had no symptoms, even despite not really working out and eating so much more. My weight has stayed very stable. And I mean, I have better energy. I'm sleeping better. I have no acne. Thank God. I was so worried about that. And it's only been 2 months. I'll be completely honest with you guys and say, like, I haven't gotten my period back yet. But I can tell that my hormones are shifting, I actually really, really would recommend you guys read the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility. During this process, like as I was kind of preparing my body to come off, I read that book and I started learning more about like cervical mucus and how it changes, during different phases of your cycle and what to look for around ovulation. I started tracking my temperature with the Aura Ring and natural cycles just to kind of get like a baseline. Because if you guys don't know, you'll learn from this book that progesterone actually increases your basal body temperature. So you can actually pinpoint the day that you ovulate just by tracking your temperature and seeing that spike in your luteal phase. So started doing that just to, get the habit. And that was really, really cool. But taking charge of your fertility made me like really mad at our school system in America, to be honest, because this was all information that I wish we were taught, So read that book, did all the nutrients and supplement things. And so far it's going well.
Yeah. And again, like I know we made this very clear on the last podcast episode, but I still want to make it clear that like we are not here to shame people for being on birth control or say that you need to come off birth control or say that birth control is bad and we're anti-birth control. We are very much neutral about birth control, and we believe that it does depend on each person's individual situation, their values, their beliefs, their body, how it's responding. But regardless of your situation, you need to understand how it's working in your body. You need to understand the potential side effects, the potential things that can come as a result of being on birth control. And that's why I wanted both of us to share our stories. Me being somebody who felt great pre-birth control and felt terrible on birth control, and my reasons for coming off and my journey of coming off, which was the example of do not do this. And then with Alex feeling terrible pre-birth control, feeling mostly great on birth control up until, towards those times in your later years as things started to unravel a little bit.
Yeah.
And then, of course, your one time coming off that was more of a do not do this. And then now you being our shining example of this is what to do. And this is the type of stuff that we do with our clients to make sure that they are properly supported through that transition, because it is a hard transition on your body. And it's something that you need to really make sure that you are going about it a smart way so that you can feel your best as fast as possible and not have more issues come as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. And truly, like, I have nothing against birth control. Like, it was awesome for me at the time. It prevented pregnancy. I felt great. And like I said, I really don't have any regrets per se, but I just wish I had the informed consent, so to speak, And everybody's body is different, right? I've had clients, they've been on birth control for 10 years. We do, their version of a flush protocol. We set them up for success, like feed them up, do all the things, and they get their cycle back with no symptoms, literally in a matter of a month. And it's crazy, right? And now I know at the very least I can say, okay, I'm really doing all the things right this time, and I still haven't gotten my cycle back yet. I know something is wrong. I know this isn't normal. Like, I know that my hormones are just kind of struggling to get back online again. And that's totally fair, considering the fact that I beat my body into the ground and was on birth control since the very first time I ever got a menstrual cycle, you know? So it's to be expected. But at the same time, again, I've had clients who have been on the pill for as long as me, and they get their cycle back right away. So it really just depends. But I'm happy that I at least know now what to do. And I know that there's an option for me,
Yeah.
right? And I'm honestly, even though I haven't got my period back, I'm so thankful that I've done what I've done and I've worked so hard to get to a place where I can take time off from the gym. I can eat more. I can put my body composition goals aside to really focus on my internal health, because like just the way that I feel right now, and again, my skin, the fact that I haven't gained any weight, like energy, brain fog lifted, mental health so much better. I wouldn't trade that for the world.
Absolutely. I love it. Awesome. Well, I hope that this episode was helpful for somebody who maybe is curious about coming off of birth control, isn't really sure how to go about it, or even if you are somebody who you have recently come off of birth control and maybe you're still struggling a little bit, maybe your symptoms haven't really resolved or you've had new symptoms come up, know that you're not a lost cause by any means. Reach out for help. We'd be happy to help you figure out what would be the next best steps for you. And if coaching would be the right thing for you, we can talk about what that would look like. But know that you're not alone, that you can educate yourself. You can get support from those who have done this, who are knowledgeable, and who have done this with so many others like yourself. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your wisdom and sharing your story. And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.